Yeah, it can be really hard to get people mobilized no matter what age they are. I think young people have a particular other disadvantage that they have school or jobs of any certain number or family obligations that they still have to take care of or high school or sports, anything. So we have to be really cautious about not overwhelming people and not asking them to give us too much of their time or feeling like they have to, sacrifice one thing for the other. Um, but it's really just showing people that even hopping onto a phone bank for 5 minutes makes a difference. Hopping onto a phone bank for 1 minute makes a difference. Just one call can help us out. Any little measure can make a big difference, and you just have to take that first step. And we also have a number of other things. You don't have to just phone bank. We also, are asking you to message all of your Twitter followers and try to get them to do what we need them to do, or work with us and identify 4 friends who you think you need to remind to vote on election day, and we plug that into our RVP program. So it's just about identifying some people who, are feeling particularly motivated in the political process, feeling like they need to do something this year to make change, and saying, okay, I hear you. You want to make change. Let's talk about what we have that will help you do that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's hard to mobilize people of all age groups.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's definitely hard. I think there's also a point of accessibility. You want to make sure that anything that you have going on, any volunteer activities are accessible to people. So with COVID, we know that a lot of us are at home. Many of us, though we might be going to school in Iowa or we have job obligations here in Iowa, we might be living at home with family in other states. And we just want to make sure that people are able to access phone banks or text banks or do something that they can, do something that they can do from home or wherever they are that isn't going to, kind of intercede with anything else that they might have going on. So if they have a family obligation or a work obligation, we want to also make sure we have times that work for them.
Yeah. I guess big events with a speaker and a sign up list are standard methods for getting people involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you definitely want to get a bunch of, like, if you're going to have an event, make sure you get their contact information too, and make sure to continuously reach out to them. I think follow up is a big thing, because just because someone says no the first time doesn't mean they'll always say no. People tend to get a little bit more panicked and cautious about the election as time goes on, and we can always loop more people into the organization later.
Question. My name's Avery. Thanks for being here. I'm just curious, what does your outreach look like in states that don't have vote by mail or where registration is a more complicated process?
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit on that. I know, for example, New Hampshire is a tough state for us. We do not do voter registration there, and it is a big bummer. We have to make sure that we work extra hard in those states to turn people out on election day and make sure that we're tracking people and making sure that we're talking to them a lot about getting registered. Of course, I'm the Next Gen Iowa state director, so I don't have a huge understanding of what goes on in those other states, but it is a problem that we're very aware of. And we also work with other organizations like the ACLU to try to make changes and help them push for legal actions that'll kind of benefit those states. We are going to see more progress as we move through the years, hopefully, knock on wood if I had some nearby. And we'll see better voting rights in certain states. I actually worked in Michigan in 2018, and we passed sweeping voter reforms for voter registration and absentee voting. And that was really nice to see. And we can continue to do stuff like that. In Iowa, of course, we are trying to make sure that the formerly incarcerated are getting their rights restored. And we're hoping that Kim Reynolds will decide to do that well in advance of Election Day so that more people can show up to vote this year.
Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, I just got a question privately. How do you try to influence voters that are not progressive? That's a great question. So we do talk to people of all different spectrums on the political scale. It's really just talking to them about what's important. So we ask for a personal story. So what matters to you? Why do you vote the way that you do? And then we try to link that up to something that we're doing. So just because someone says that they're a Republican, for example, my grandmother firmly believes she's a Republican, but has always voted with pro-choice politicians throughout her entire life. um, we try to have this conversation of like, okay, what issues are important to you? Actually, we do support those issues, and these candidates support those issues. And I think you would see a lot of eye to eye with them. There's usually something that we can do, some way that we can link people up to them. And I think, there are some candidates that might be in that person's party that they don't support. I think we know a lot of Republicans who don't like Donald Trump, and yet he's on the Republican ticket. And they're going to end up voting a different way, or at least, not turn out to vote for Donald Trump. And then some people are going to be stuck where they want to be and are not going to side with us, and that's okay. They have their opinion, and we'll keep moving forward, and we'll talk to the next person.
Awesome. So if there are no other questions, last call. Okay. We're going to go ahead and move on. Again, thank you so much, Britt, for taking the time out of your evening to join us. I'm blown away with all the work that you and NextGen are doing. I probably speak for many when I say that I really appreciate how much you value getting youth involved in our democracy, especially voting, because it really matters. I'm really excited to see what NextGen ends up doing this fall with the upcoming election. So
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to post some links in the chat too.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, so go ahead and check out those links, guys. Alrighty, so we're going to move into our next portion of this evening, our small group discussions, so we can talk about our takeaways and thoughts about the movie Time to Choose. We have designated leaders who will be prompting discussion topics, and they will be identifying themselves once you get in your groups. Our small groups will be meeting for about 30 minutes. So we'll see each other back here at around 6:50 Central Time, where Josh will be giving us a nice recap of some upcoming events, as well as an action for us to take. You should see, if breakout rooms are ready, an icon pop up on your screen, and it will have an option to join breakout groups. And that does pop up. Go ahead and join it.
All right. Thanks so much, Britt. That was great.
Sorry, I'm just slacking someone else, but I'm going to post some links in the chat if that's okay with you.
Yeah. When we all come back to this main group, they'll all be there, and I'm speaking afterwards. So I'll remind everybody that they're there.
Awesome, thanks. Sorry, I hope that I didn't go too political, but that is what NextGen does. So I just wanted to talk about it. I saw Renee's post in the chat, so.
Oh, I haven't read it, but you're a guest speaker, so it was good hearing about NextGen and the work you guys are doing. So thank you for that. I've got to hop into a small group, but I will talk to you soon. And thank you again for being here tonight.
Was published that day, so they were all talking about it because they had seen it in the one newspaper.
So I was
Oh,
the
excited
point
to
of
know that.
discussion.
Yeah. Cool. And Marcel and Sophia, do you guys know each other? You've probably crossed paths in Zooms before. Sophia is one of our star volunteers in District 1, and Marcella is an intern in District 4. 3.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I
sorry.
was on the Marcella was on the meeting with Abby Finkenauer's.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm. Yeah.
We all know each other. Okay, cool. And Josh is here now also. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's get chatting about this movie. Josh, do you want to run things or do you want me to?
If you could take lead and I will just participate, because I'm gonna have to be paying attention to people that lose internet and putting them back in
Yeah.
their breakout group and that.
No. Okay, cool. Great. So we can skip intros since we all know each other here. Okay, so we all watched Time to Choose. I think a good place to start is just like first impressions, describing the movie in a few words, and maybe like, you know, what you felt was like the main takeaway or whatever.
Well, like I thought it was very different than a lot of the documentaries I've watched on like the environment, or like I've watched a few like about going vegan. It was because it wasn't like trying to go directly at like each individual human, but like kind of like corporations and like how we need to like make more bigger changes rather than like the tiny things. Like I think it was focusing on like bigger picture things rather than like the individual.
Yeah, 100%. It was definitely like a big picture story they were telling. Marcella, what were your kind of first impressions?
I felt like there wasn't a whole lot of detail. Like, personally, they could have been a lot more harsher on some topics because I felt like they gave you an idea of what it was, showed you an example and how to fix it, but they didn't really show how to fix it, in my opinion. Especially with like the ag one, I really felt very questioning when I got done with it. Like, is this actually an option? Because I've done those options and nothing's like changed in their version. So there's that opinion I got out of it. I just felt like there was nothing there.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when you have a story that is like really big picture, it is like harder to get into the like nitty gritty of like how change gets made and what needs to happen. So yeah, I agree. Like there definitely could have been more there, and I think generally like my first impression of this movie was like it was like your classic story of like struggle and optimism, and like they're showing like the solutions and how it doesn't have to be this way. But I think like generally this was more of like a movie for people who like don't necessarily know as much as we know about these issues, because right like what you said, once you really like know the reality of like farming, then they're kind of like blanket statements about it don't necessarily like resonate. So yeah, that's definitely a strength the movie could have worked harder on.
And it like put me to sleep, honestly. I had to watch it, like I watched it Friday night because I knew I wouldn't be able to watch it on Saturday. And I had to watch it Saturday night because I fell asleep halfway through it on Friday because it was just dry. And like I knew within the first 5 minutes that I was gonna fall asleep at some point during it. So yeah, that just tells you how much sleep I have not gotten and how stressed I am.
Mm-hmm. That's hard. Well, I think one of the things that was most like that the movie did really well was like it had a lot of really strong imagery, and a lot of like really, really beautiful or otherwise like really disturbing or upsetting images. So another question I want to talk about is what was the most memorable? So what didn't put you to sleep? Sophia, you want to share?
Yeah, like I don't know, I got when I don't remember what the guy was saying, but the guy who died from what was it, stomach cancer, or when he was saying like just like when you've lived your whole life with like fresh food, like just being able to go in the water and then it all changes, like just seeing the water, it was very disgusting, and like just thinking about how they're like, it's just such a shock, and then like how the kids like have to grow up in that, like we like a totally different world, like you don't, I mean, we're really not exposed to that world, like that type of living that much. So that really stood up to me. I was getting pretty angry at that.
I think that was like the guy in Nigeria. Is that where you're? Yeah. Yeah, and I think like definitely like we're not exposed to like that type of setting, but at the same time, like I can even think about like things I remember from the environment around me as a kid that like don't exist anymore. Like it used to snow. Like it never snows in New York anymore. Like that's just like a big thing that stands out to me. And so like obviously it's not on the same scale, but I'm sure we can all think of things that like we can remember from our childhoods that we don't see anymore. What stood out to you, Marcella?
Really, the energy poverty. Like, I knew there was poverty and that's an issue globally, but I'd never been exposed to the energy poverty part. I think that was in the first third, and just seeing like there's some years you don't even have that, and just like that's a harsh reality, and I think that's not exposed really at all, like even within just general poverty, and not even like climate change is not even brought up.
Yeah. It's like pretty remarkable to think of all of the pollution that we cause when so much of the global population like doesn't even have access to electricity or like anything that is polluting. um so yeah, that's definitely really jarring. One of the scenes that really stood out to me was the coal mining in China, and that footage from underground that just like seems so like, I don't know, I learned about like coal mining in like the early 1900s when I was like in middle school, and it's like so crazy to think that that type of really dangerous mining still goes on, and that like that guy that was in the video died like minutes later. Like that's just crazy, and whoever was filming had to like watch him die presumably.
Yeah.
And when they compared it to like wind energy, like how many people die,
Yeah.
and he said none.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was like a big shock to me. Was I wrote, like, I was taking notes here and there of things that stood out to me, and one of them was that when they did the chart of life expectancy for coal miners, and like an underground coal miner had as a life expectancy currently of like 49 years old. And then there was the one guy that like had been diagnosed with black lung, and he was like, I didn't even know like you could get that like from doing this kind of thing. And it would just kind of reinforced how this is like such a bigger problem than just climate, because you know those people are definitely being exploited for just not having the knowledge of what can happen, and like those companies are doing that knowingly for profit.
And also that they couldn't like say who they were or even show their face because they would be like charged or something because of the disaster that mining is. I thought that was kind of weird that they couldn't be like truly who they are as a person. They had to be behind like a screen and they couldn't say their actual names and stuff. It was kind of drastic.
Yeah. And I think like that for me really, like Josh just said, kind of like highlighted how interconnected all of these issues are. Like when we don't have human rights and we don't have like a free press or democracy, like then we don't have people speaking up against environmental atrocities, and then we have like worse environmental circumstances. And so it really does show that like we are fighting a multi-front battle, like when we fight for more like democracy and inclusivity and representation, like we're not just fighting for those things on like, you know, at their face value, like they open up a lot of other doors and, you know, make a lot of things possible that aren't possible without them. So I don't know, it's really easy to think of like environmental issues as just like the fight against carbon, but like it's way deeper than that, and I think this movie did do a good job of showing that. Okay, so with that in mind, which problem discussed in the movie, and there were a lot of them, do we feel is like the most difficult to tackle? Like, I don't know, Marcel, I know you mentioned this stuff about ag. If you want to elaborate on that, or just anyone can jump in.
I think the ones where like, I guess the economy is really involved in everything, but like I feel like oil, like the oil industry, that would be, I don't know, just competing with that is I just listened to a podcast actually about like the oil industry and like how like we're not using as much, and like countries are fighting of like we should like stop producing, but then other countries will get ahead. It's a long story, but I feel like they have a lot of power, so I feel like that could be just hard to work against.
Because I think like the oil and ag were probably the two biggest ones for me, just because oil drives our economy, really, because we are in a war over oil. And just kind of that drama, I feel like causes a lot of unrest politically, especially in poorer nations. And then that loses trade opportunities for agriculture. So it's just like a ripple effect. And you can't stop that ripple effect because it's still happening. And that, and then agriculture, just, it's a sore spot to talk about, it seems like these days. And it's just getting harder and harder to talk about, really.
I think for me, one of the bigger kind of like more overarching issues that was apparent is the issue of corruption. And like that was like a big example in Indonesia that they talked about in the context of Indonesia, and how big companies will basically just bribe officials to give them this like forest license to clear cut. But it also occurred to me that like corruption is not just an issue in other parts of the world. Like when they showed one, I think it was a senator who was like talking about how climate change is not an issue and it's the biggest hoax of all time, and they showed all that guy's funders, and it's just like that's corruption. And when we have that, like we don't stand a chance of like fighting these battles, like. And so that was definitely the big one that stood out to me too. And like, I find it interesting that they don't use the word corruption when it applies to our country. It like feels kind of like messed up that like they would distinguish what's going on in Indonesia from what's going on here, when like those are both bribes. Like that's all bribery. That's like, I'll donate to your campaign if you make the climate people go away. So I don't know, that was interesting to me too. Josh, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, we're talking about biggest problems, right? Or big, like to tackle that it highlighted. I mean, one of them to me that we haven't talked about as much was just when it was the transportation system, and looking at like how we've built our roads and everything, our like our systems of getting goods places and people places, just all around like cars. And there was like the one stat that stood out to me that only like 30% of people in China own a car, but their traffic is like insanely gridlocked, especially in cities. So it just seems like that's quite the transition that we will have to do in order to actually like combat that problem. And I think there was somebody in there that said something about like it's not just about getting a more energy efficient car. It's about getting in the car less, which I think is, you know, definitely doable in lots of places, but I do think it's tough to do that everywhere. So I don't know if that we'll ever be able to just like fully combat, like get rid of oil and cars and the problems there, but I think we can definitely reduce it, but it's no easy task.
Yeah, totally.
And I'm just sitting here thinking like that problem and like where I live, how big of an issue it is. And like our family, there's 4 people that drive and we have 4 vehicles. And so we're just all thinking like how like we were trying to reduce vehicles at one point, and then we're sitting here like we have 4 people with 4 different schedules. 2 of us are in sports and our 2 different sports seasons. So we're just thinking like some people that's not an option, but then like I've seen people have that option and do it, and it's been so much better, especially in our area. Like we've seen a difference in the air quality, especially now with COVID. Like people are less likely to be in a vehicle, and so thinking like how can you implement that after this is probably the biggest issue we have right now, is figuring out can we keep the sustainable practices now in 4 months, say when quarantine's over, if it's ever over, and like is there ways we could keep doing it?
Yeah, and the thing that's weird too is like here in New York, like mass transit is way more accessible, but like because of Corona, nobody's using it, and so it's like, how do we get? That's gonna like a big thing that worries me, and it was really weird watching this movie from, was it like 2014? This movie was made like now, first of all, it being so much later and also it being the pandemic, like, I don't know, it is definitely like we have a whole new set of battles to fight here. So it's interesting.
It's weird for me too though, because like I just assume I've always just because my family's just like taught me to grow up on biking everywhere instead of using cars, just because well, more my mom like is very very environmentally friendly, and like we just for exercise just bike everywhere. And then I talk to some people, I'm like, do you want to go on a bike ride, like should we bike there? And they're like, I don't have a bike. And I'm like, what? How do you not have a bike?
Yeah, biking is the best. I never used to bike in New York City because it's scary because like people get run over. But nobody, there are like way fewer cars on the road, and I like can't take the subway or even like get in a cab because germs. So I started biking like all over the city when I was there a couple weeks ago, and it was awesome. Like, but I don't have my own bike, and I was using the bike sharing. So yeah. Okay, new question. This one I like. As a consumer, it can feel impossible to do the right thing all the time, especially when so many companies keep their actions a secret. And I'll add, especially when a lot of things are out of our control, like we just, as people our age, like we can't control where we get our energy from, for example. Like we can't buy a house and finance solar panels and all that stuff. What do you feel like we can do to fight against all these wrongdoings on the part of the corporations that feed us and give us energy and get us places and so on? I'll start with the obvious one, which I would say is organizing. um, so yeah, like I know, like we said, a lot of times we don't know when companies are doing shady stuff, but when we do know, we can do as much as we can to inform people and use your classic, you know, boycott, protest, all that stuff to get companies to change.
I don't know, I think like putting your money like in smart places, I think I just read this thing that I just also listened to this podcast. It was saying like money is very political. Like where you put your money really makes a difference. So, like just like I know fast fashion. It's not the one of the biggest issues, but it is like I think like putting your money in smart like clothing stores and like I just read about like Amazon and like Amazon, like instead of buying from Amazon, which gives money to one person, and like bordering from like smaller brands that like directly like make that item and stuff like that.
Yeah. Cool. And I think on a broader scale, like like if you're going to do any like investing with your savings, like making sure you invest in responsible companies, you know, like renewables companies or, you know, anything like that. Definitely not companies that are doing bad stuff. Marcella, are you going to say something?
I was going to say with us, we don't really invest in companies that much just because our farm is so self-sufficient. We invest in ourselves. So like a lot of the stuff we raise, we process and then we consume for us. So that's definitely an approach we've taken a lot lately, is we're not going to give our money away when we can put it back into us and do sustainable practices that a lot of people aren't doing in our area. And it's been making a difference for us just because we're having a lot more success, especially with cattle lately, which is really weird because the markets are crap. But we're able to be logical what we're doing and have the ability to change our ways because we're changing our ways, and the people that we would allow our ground, like renters, are backing out because they don't like what we're doing. So that's been definitely a thing, but I don't know, like other people can't do this really.
Well,
Like logically they can't invest in themselves because of like they don't have the assets to do that. But if there's a way to do it, there will be a way.
yeah, I think like the general message there is like be as self-sufficient as you can. So like if you don't live on a farm, like I don't know, think about like, okay, if something breaks, like you can either fix it or you can replace it, like try to fix it. If you like, if something, I don't know, like figure out how to like sew some clothes or like recycle things, like all that kind of stuff is like definitely ways that you can just stop yourself from like feeding into like bad consumerist cycles.
And hand-me-downs.
No,
Like,
totally.
if you have like your family members
Stores or like,
yeah.
you know, secondhand stores, all of that is like a better way to do things for sure.
Because I've seen a lot with like global companies and who they're supporting, especially politically now with this upcoming election. Like you can easily like make a decision on a global company. If say 20 people quit going there, that's like a lot less they're gaining in income. If you like invest somewhere else, that's more sustainable.
Yeah, I think like the general things are like do things locally and do things yourself as much as you can. Okay, and going back to the movie a bit. Well, why don't we end on like a positive note? What about the movie gave you the most hope, if anything?
I think when they talked about, I don't know what year, I think they said in 2020 or something, like renewable energy is going to be like very competitive with like fossil fuels and the oil industry and stuff.
Yeah, and like it is. I mean, I don't know if it exactly like lived up to what their projections were, but it's definitely growing. Electric vehicles are growing. So and it is kind of weird to see like what their projections were, and now we're like living in that time. But you could see more how things are unfolding. Josh.
I like to see the part where the one guy talked about like coining bus rapid transit and how that's like spread to like almost every country in the world. as a way to increase ridership on bus transit. And it doesn't require cities to invest a bunch of money into a light rail or a subway system. Because I know that there's like various cities that I'm constantly reading about that are like voting on adopting bus rapid transit plans and lines and everything else over the last couple of years. So I just thought it was cool to see that that started so long ago. I forget the country, but it was in Europe, I believe, and now it's all over the place.
Yeah. And I think one part for me that stood out was like their whole thing about California. And that was cool because like they did show projections. And now we do see like California really is living up to that and has like the most like solar and wind and all that stuff. And it keeps growing. So that was cool because California is like, I think California is in like the top 5 like global economy. So that's definitely important in what they do.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I think we're just going to wait until all breakout groups are back. I believe in the next 30 seconds they should all be here. And then we're going to talk about a quick action that we can all take, and then some upcoming events. Okay, great. Well, welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed your time in the small groups and had some great discussion on the time to choose a documentary. I know in the small group that I was in, listening to other people, it definitely made me think about some things that I hadn't thought about when I was watching it. And it was definitely very informative to bounce some ideas off of each other and see what everybody got out of it. So now that we have all, I guess I should also say my name's Josh and I'm an organizer with Environment Iowa in Iowa's 2nd District, hanging around Iowa City. So now that we all have talked about a big problem that is out there, we've watched a movie on it, we've discussed it in small groups. We here at Environment Iowa have just started a brand new petition that Avery or Nina, would you be able to throw in the chat for me? Awesome. So this petition, as you can see here, is calling on Congress to support investing in energy efficiency and conservation block grant programs. So these help small businesses invest and cities within states invest in renewable energy and energy efficiency. So we are calling on Congress to do this. So if you open up the chat, I see that it was just there. We're asking everybody to click on that right now and sign that petition. If you've already signed it, because you have been quick and got it in one of our emails that went out today, it would be awesome if you could maybe share it with a friend and ask them to sign it. So let's take the next 2 minutes to sign that petition and or share it with a friend and ask them to sign it. And then at the 55 mark, we will come back here so I can talk about some upcoming events that we are going to be having.
We sign the petition now?
Yes, that would be awesome. The more names we can get on there, the better.
And where is it?
If you go to the chat in Zoom right now, you should see a link that you can copy and paste into your internet browser.
Oh. Oh.
And if you don't see that in the chat, you could always write down this URL address right here that we have up on the screen. And if you just type that into the your URL or Google search kind of thing, it should pop up. All right, we'll just take 30 more seconds for that. And if you haven't had time yet to find that petition, feel free just to write down the link so that you can sign it soon, or share it with some friends or family that you think might also like to show their support for this effort. All right, great. Thank you, everybody, for taking some time to do that. If you signed it, as I said, feel free to share it with anybody else that you think might like to show their support. A petition's pretty easy to do, and I think just like organizing, the more people that we can have join and show their support and sign the petition, the bigger of an impact that we're going to be able to make together at the end of the day. The last things I want to let you know about before we let you go, these links are also going to be pasted into the chat right now. So to put on your radar, most upcoming this Wednesday, we have our Work Smarter, Not Harder virtual panel on energy efficiency. So this is happening this upcoming Wednesday. It starts at 6 p.m. Central Time, and we have 3 really exciting speakers that are going to be able to talk about, one that can talk about energy efficiency from a business background, one from a home, and another from a college campus. So that's coming up this upcoming Wednesday, and you can click on the link that's getting posted into the chat to RSVP to that. And then the last thing I want to put on your radar is next week we have our Bike for Climate Week of Action. So this is happening during the same time period that we would normally have RAGBRAI. So we have a lot of cool virtual events happening, a lot of great webinars, information, efforts to talk about biking and clean transportation. So if you go to our Facebook link that's being posted in the chat right now for that, you can RSVP there, and that will keep you up to date with all of the exciting events that we'll be having happen all online during that week, which is next week. So thank you guys all so much for joining us tonight for our Time to Choose virtual discussion. I hope you all had some great discussions in your small groups, like I know we did in ours. And I hope to see you all at an event soon. Have a good night, everybody.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.